Welcome to A Reader's Paradise for book lovers, audiobook listeners, writers, and for everyone who loves a great story. Hello, and welcome to another episode of A Reader's Paradise. If you like the show and you like what you're hearing, do me a favor and go over into the comments area and leave us a comment so that other people can find us. And also, if you like the podcast, give us a rating. Hit that 5-star button. And finally, please share the podcast with those who also love a great story. So, on today's show, we have a very, very special guest. And we're doing something a little different on the Reader's Paradise podcast today with this author. This author is a guy by the name of Darryl Harvey. And Darryl is a children's book author. Darryl, please take a moment to introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Darryl Harvey, and I am a children's author and poet from the great city of Chicago. I was originally started out writing poetry in high school and college, and eventually I moved on to self-publishing my very first book called Loving a Black Woman.
Now, was that a book of poetry or was that a contemporary novel?
No, that was a book of poetry. Poetry is my first love.
Okay.
And so, as I fell in love with the written word, I got more into poetry. But later on, in my professional life, I was a social worker. I worked in social services, and that's what got me prompted to write for children.
Okay, so what was it about social services that, can you help us make the connection there? What was it about working in social services and writing children's book that made things connect for you?
Well, I was mentoring a young boy. He was only like 5 or 6 years old, but everyone in his life was a woman. He was in a single-parent home with a mother and a sister. His babysitter, who I was dating at the time, was female. His teacher was female. So his mom was seeking a male role model for him. And so I began to mentor him, and I mentored him for a little over a year. And as our time was coming to an end, I wanted to give him something to remember by. And so that is kind of where it came to a connection, because I had been writing poetry. And I put together a little rhyming story for someone age appropriate for him. And the rhyming story became enough for a book. And so I connected with an illustrator, and the first book, my first children's book, called I Can Do Anything, was born.
Okay. And can you give us a sense of what I Can Do Anything? What's the theme of that book?
Well, I Can Do Anything is a kind of a self-esteem builder for young children who are just starting to read.
Mm-hmm.
So it reviews numbers, colors, and shapes. It's very colorful. It has bright sight words, and it stars a little African-American boy. And for those of you who don't know this, when it comes to children's books, only about 3% of them have black faces on their covers.
Yes. I have heard of that grievance from a number of sources within the publishing industry. So yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so I figured that it was my duty that if I was going to write a children's book and have an African American main character, then he would have to be on the front cover. And the title of the book, I Can Do Anything, is a message to little black children that, you can do anything. And it is a repeating theme throughout the book.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you this, because this is going to be more of a social political question about the education system and even more importantly parenting for certain demographics. For example, I know I have several friends who are school teachers, particularly in those pre-K, kindergarten, first, second grade, those that demographic. And one of the complaints that I've heard from several teachers is that some young children come into the school system in a situation where they have not learned things like their ABCs, and it makes it difficult for them to keep up with children that have parents who have taken the time to teach children ABCs and taught them, some basic knowledge about reading and the written word. Now, I would love to say that's just an extreme case, but what I'm hearing more and more is that that's just not the case. This is, in some groups, in some demographics, becoming the norm. And so my question to you is having an African American boy on a cover for these demographics that are underserved, or for readers who may not have other readers in the household, is this a book that those kids would automatically gravitate to because they see it? Because the thing that I know is that children are sponges, and whatever, especially when they're young, whatever you put in front of them, they're going to soak up. And so if you put your work in front of them, is that something that they're going to be able to soak up and make them want to learn, not only about reading, not only about their letters, but about reading and about overall storytelling?
Yeah, absolutely it is. As a matter of fact, I have self-published 10 titles, 5 books of poetry, 5 books for children. And that first book, I Can Do Anything, is my bestseller. No matter what event I'm at, that is the one.
That is the one. And so that it's, I think it's just such a positive title that just stands out, and I think even adults would resonate with that, because they would want their children to feel like they can do anything, especially in the world that is cynical and tries to cut your dreams down. But the title itself, I Can Do Anything, just speaks volumes. As you said, the book also has a theme of self-esteem. So what other things about self-esteem are in the book that you sort of try to grapple with or tackle, or that you saw needed to be addressed?
Well, for that particular title, again, this is a book that is aimed at beginning readers. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about very young children, so it also emphasizes independent skills. Very small things that little kids are trying to learn how to do. They're trying to tie their shoe and learn how to bathe appropriately. So there's a scene where the star is washing his face. But also, he has friends. You see him in the classroom with his fellow students. You see him outside playing with his friends, but you also see him with his family, a mother and a father, which is important to see, as we have many households that are single parent households, but it's still a good thing for them to be able to see a mother and a father.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. So you also mentioned that this book came out of your sense of being a mentor to a young man, for a while, and it seems like that mentorship, spawned this bigger, broader sense in you, or duty in you, to be a mentor of sorts to young people through your work. Is that how you feel about it? Because that's the sense that I'm getting.
Well, I believe that I was a social worker before I actually got paid to be a social worker. In helping along the way different friends with different issues. It's kind of something that's, I think that's just natural for me. I always, of course, I came from a two-parent household with a nurturing mother and a giving, but what's the word I would use? I don't want to say strict, but a father who was a man's man who did the things that I think that a father should do. So, and part of that was I saw compassion in him and giving to other people. And so that is just a part of who I am or who I was raised to be.
Okay.
So along the line, yeah.
No, please finish.
Along those lines, I think it became a natural thing for me to gravitate towards that field of work. And during the time that I spent mentoring, it inspired me. Well, I actually saw other children who had, not just our relationships have grown, but, we spoke briefly about education. And you could see some educational deficits in some of the kids that I was mentoring. And part of our mentoring sessions would always be a visit to the library and include reading or some work on some homework. And my second book actually is inspired by my mentoring with Black children. I was mentoring a pair of brothers, 5th and 7th grade. We took a trip to the library, and I asked them some very basic questions, some very basic science questions. Matter of fact, the questions that I asked them were on the 2nd grade level. They had no idea what I was talking about. And at that time, these boys were in 5th and 7th grade, and I asked them basic 2nd grade science. They had no idea what I was talking about.
Was it that they just hadn't been introduced to it, or was it they didn't want to know? What was your sense of that?
My sense of that is that I feel that they were not really introduced to it. I think that they were, as is done with a lot of our children, just passed on. If they were introduced to it, they didn't grasp it, and they were just passed on to the next grades. And, as we know, the 3rd grade is a real crucial grade for children in finding out what they are capable of learning. Many of our schools determine that, if a kid isn't able to read at the 3rd grade level on time, that those deficits probably will have them end up in not even graduating high school or
so their risk factors go up. So there is a correlation between I'm speaking in very broad terms here, but I get the sense that there is a correlation between literacy and education, and if a person who is deficient in those areas has a higher risk factor for ending up in the system, if you will, because they will be lacking some of the basic skills needed in order to navigate the world. Am I correct in thinking that?
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. And, there have been a lot of studies about this kind of thing. And unfortunately, as you touched on earlier, some of our kids are coming into schools or not prepared or not having the study and work ethic to make it successfully throughout their scholastic career.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say those things have to be emphasized and watched closely by the parents.
Yeah, Yeah, and I would agree with that because I believe that reading should not start at school. Reading starts at home. You know,
Yeah, exactly.
and that starts with parents even reading to the child while the child is still in the womb developing. Making sure that when the child comes into the world that there are plenty of books and things to help stimulate their mind and their sense of curiosity, because when children are young, they're very curious. They're sponges because their brains are growing and they're full of questions, and sometimes I think we parents may forget that this is a, when kids are, curious about their world, 2 through 7 or those ages, I mean, their brains are being shaped permanently with some of the things that we influence them with. So you don't want to tell a curious 5-year-old to go sit down someplace or stop asking me questions, because they're learning and their brain is forming and they're developing and they're making connections at that stage. And so I think it's I'm thinking about my own daughter, when she was that age, how, she would love to sit up under me and listen to me read to her and, look at the pictures in the book and, point out and say, what's this word? Or how do you say this word? And, I would tell her, and then she would repeat back to me, okay, this is the letter B, this is letter A, this is letter K, this is letter E, and this is bake. And then they make the connection with, a picture of somebody baking something. And it doesn't take them long. They just need that time to do that. Let me ask you this question about your work. Have you heard back or have you communicated with a young person? I know you're dealing with children's book, or maybe you heard back from the parent, how children have received your work. Do they like it? Do they find it engaging? What have you heard back?
Actually, yes. As I have been writing children's books for a few years now, I've self-published 5 titles under what I call the Sunflower Series. So I go to different venues every year, and I have repeat customers and families that come back to me and tell me how much they have enjoyed the book previous to the one that they are purchasing the next time. So it has been a really cool, it's a really great feeling when you have something like that, when someone, a family, a kid, a teacher, social workers, whatever, come back after they've read my work and tell me how much they've appreciated.
Wonderful. Let me ask you this question, because there are so many people who are closet writers, and sometimes people are not necessarily interested in writing, the great American novel, and there are a lot of people out there who are interested in writing in your genre of children's literature. What advice would you give them as a published author about writing in this genre?
I think and the same may be true for all genres, is to make sure that you know your subject. You can't just jump into writing a book without knowing what surrounds it. So I would say doing your research about a particular genre and how the audience responds to it, or what they like, and what you want to say. Make sure you do your research so that it seems genuine, what you're writing, and it doesn't seem like something that's just thrown together. I think research will probably be the best thing.
Yeah, researching the genre and seeing what other books are out there and seeing what books are successful. Because one of the things that I think about when I think of children's literature, I think of Where the Wild Things Are, and I think of Dr. Seuss, the Dr. Seuss series, where he Green Eggs and Ham and those sorts of things, which were most certainly books in my childhood that I can recall. And, that's just the importance of, literacy and reading, that, when you think about, childhood books that you had, there are people that if you were a reader or if you were introduced to it, it sticks with you for a lifetime. those titles and those books, you remember them. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about literacy and literature. So let me ask you, what were some of your favorite children's books coming up, or even today? Do you have any favorite children's books that you like to look at, peruse, or a children's book author that you like to follow? Let us know.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that particular thing up. On the level of children's books. Honestly, when I was growing up, what really captured my imagination was comic books.
I can agree with that too. Go ahead.
I was a nut for comic books. So very early on, I was introduced to, your Spider-Man, your Iron Man, all those kind of things. And I would have to say it inspired my love of reading. I did my, of course, homework and read stories at school, but if I was really engaged in something, I was in a comic book. And that just fueled my love for reading. And later on, as I got into high school, I fell in love with poetry. And I started reading people like Nikki Giovanni, and I started, trying to craft my own poetry, which led to my first title years later, after I wrote in my high school newspaper, and then I wrote articles. And then when I got to college, I went to Northern Illinois University, and I started writing for a little black magazine there called Lifeline. And I tried my first hand at putting poetry in the newspaper. And now I go back to those poems and I think,
oh, it's always something when we go back and look at our early works, isn't it?
And I go back to that early work and I was like, what was I thinking?
Oh, I have been there.
Yeah, but now, my first book of poetry, Loving a Black Woman, got a notice from Sister to Sister magazine, and they printed up, how much they liked it and all that. And so that gave me just fuel for the fire to keep writing. And so here I am, 10 titles later, about to publish titles 11 and 12.
Okay. Real quickly, name all of your children's book titles.
Okay. I Can Do Anything.
Mm-hmm.
Alicia's Big Test, which was inspired by mentoring the boys with science. So Alicia has a science test, and she doesn't think she's ready, so she has to study, and her parents help her study. And it's a great book, again, for people or little kids who are just learning to read and have an interest in science. The next book is Amigo Means Friend, and it introduces about 12 words of elementary Spanish, along with the lesson of children working together. My fourth title is What Do You Do When a Bully Picks on You? And, of course, that goes around the topic of bullying.
Yeah.
The kids have a bully, and he's physically abusive. He does cyber bullying, as well as calls them names, and they have to figure out a way to have him stop bullying. And the last title is Anthony Breaks His Promise, which introduces the themes and concepts of integrity and accountability.
Oh my God, those are such important things. Having integrity in, especially for young men growing up, learning to have integrity. Your integrity is so important, not only in childhood, but in life and in relationships and everything else going forward. So kudos to you for, introducing such a life skill, at a young age. But continue.
Thank you. Yeah. It is those things are very important, and we often find that when someone breaks a promise, they they do anything or say anything or try to blame someone else for them not living up to what they promised or what they were supposed to do, or ways to not actually be accountable for their own words.
Right.
And with this, I'm trying to teach young people like you said, at a very young age, to grasp that concept and be responsible for themselves.
Yeah, and so when you have young readers like that, where you're trying to teach these concepts to them, as you say, it is great to do that, because one, they want to learn, and two, they'll even ask more questions that sometimes even challenges you as an adult. It's like, you want to be truthful with the child, but there are also, realities that have to be dealt with. Like, what if, for example, you may raise your child one way with integrity and respect and, to have all of these common core values, but someone else may not raise their children, with those same core concepts and values. And sometimes children will ask, well, Johnny doesn't believe in integrity, and why is that? And you have to those are interesting dynamics that children will ask, because children will ask some tough questions once they get the concept. And I think that's very I think that's very interesting. And again, for you to tackle these sorts of things in your books at a young age is just incredible, especially when you say, what do you do when what was the title with the bully title? I don't want to butcher the title.
What do you do when a bully picks on you?
What do you do when a bully picks on you? Now, I'm quite sure that many listeners out there have a bully story in their childhood somewhere where they can think of some time in their life where they were bullied or picked on. But bullying for probably you and I looked a lot different than it does today.
It's with the cyber piece.
Yeah, it's with the cyber piece, which is a problem. And then I'm not sure if you heard recently where this young 13-year-old girl or 12-year-old girl, I think she was 12 or 13, she was attacked by a group of girls a block or two away from her school. And so they videotaped, this incident. And then a few days later, the young lady died, at like 12 or 13 years old. Did you hear about that?
I did, and it's a tragic situation. And on that same level, there have been several young men who have been bullied and committed suicide in recent times.
Yeah, and it's these are very real things that young people have to deal with, not just in a preteen age, but maybe in second or third grade, where you start seeing these behavior patterns coming up in young children. And you have to say, well, if you're doing this in second and third grade, well, what was going on in kindergarten and pre-K and first grade? Where did we lose you with, as you say, things like integrity, truthfulness, honesty, veracity, these concepts that you learn through literature, you learn through stories, you learn through a sense of right and wrong and good and bad. And if you're not getting that in your community, it's nice to have that sort of thing, in a book, and then have it supported. Not only read it, but have it supported in action. Would you agree with that?
I would totally agree with that, and that's one of the reasons why I've been trying to get my books, especially that one, out to schools and try to get more knowledge and talk conversation around bullying in an effort to get it to stop.
Yeah. I mean, and it is, and I know in our current political arena, we're polarized by the messaging that is coming out of the leadership, which seems to certainly indirectly support, behavior that does not serve the best interests, of the country, of the people of this country as a community. And so I can imagine a situation where you may be trying to teach your young child, the right way to do things, but then they see leadership at the highest levels doing the exact opposite. And, yeah, go ahead.
It's a shame that we have someone in office who personifies what a bully is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And and then I think we as a country, as strange as it sounds, we seem to be trying to figure out how to deal with it. It's like even the adults seem to have, lost like the common core things that you address in your work, that we said as a nation, as a people, as a community, that this sort of human behavior is unacceptable and not tolerable. And then all of a sudden now we're saying we're turning a blind eye to that. And that is just really, really just, it's just mind boggling to understand that concept for us as adults. Again, and I imagine as children, that sends a conflicting message, a message of confusion. And, as children grow older and they start becoming teenagers, and they decide that, whatever emotion that I'm feeling, anger, vengeance, rage, or whatever, it's okay to, at 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, to go and take it out on Johnny or Susie. And it's okay that my friends videotape, this behavior that I exhibit where I'm actually harming people.
Right. Yeah, it is really unfortunate, and I think that's another reason why, through education and through having conversations of right and wrong, what it means, how it hurts other people, starting at a young age, maybe we can do something about it, or at least attempt to have it reduced, have it slowed down, because where we are now, we are talking about just a little bit of teasing or even a mild scuffle. We're talking about kids actually dying. So we have to do something to make an effort to stop that.
Yeah, and I think it starts, at a very, very young age. Start when they're just first learning about these, when they first start learning, so that they understand that, there are consequences for, these actions. And you also said there was another book where that you mentioned a title where someone breaks a promise. Can you tell us a little bit about that book?
Yeah, again, that's my most recent children's book, Anthony Breaks His Promise. So Anthony has made promises to his friends. He's made promises to other people, and Anthony doesn't keep his promises. And so naturally, those other people are upset with Anthony. And Anthony doesn't understand why. What's the seriousness of them being upset with him? And so he feels down that they're mad with him, and he has a talk with his father to explain to him exactly the weight of his words. And when he makes promises, people actually expect him to keep those promises, and that's called integrity.
Mm. Yeah.
And when you don't keep your promises, and there's a response to that that's not positive,
right?
You have to do something to make up for those broken promises, and that's called accountability. Accepting that you messed up.
Right. Now you also mentioned another book, Amigo Means Friend. Tell us a bit about that novel or that children's book.
Well, so in my thought, Spanish, the language, is, there's a larger Spanish population in the United States now more than it has ever been. Mm-hmm. And Black and brown people, I think, are going to run into each other and have many things in common, whether they know it or not. And so I think that it was beneficial for me to write a book that just introduces elementary Spanish. So in the book, there's a young man that comes to a predominantly English-speaking school, mm-hmm. but he doesn't really speak English. And so it's up to the kids in the school to help him translate English and Spanish. And so thereby the reader gets to learn some Spanish as they read along.
Okay, so that's wonderful. So do you plan, or have you thought of doing that for other cultures other than Spanish? So, to do perhaps a Japanese or a Chinese or Italian, just of various cultures that America has.
Actually, my next book is more not alongside saying the language, mm-hmm. But actually it introduces other cultures based upon their histories and what it means to grow up in those different cultures as a child.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So, so I'm exploring China. I'm exploring Italy. China, Italy. I'm drawing a blank on the others right now, but China and Italy are in that group, and should have that ready for release by Christmas.
Okay. Let me ask you this writer's question. This next one is a writer's question. About how long does it take you to write a book?
Oh, man. Well, it depends upon what genre I'm working on. If it was poetry, it's going to take a good year to gather everything that especially, if you're thinking about one particular theme. That's looking at a year. If it's a children's book, not as long. Maybe I would say 2 to 3 months at the stage that I'm at now, because I'm at the beginning. You're talking about preschool, first grade. What I'm trying to say doesn't take that long, but actually trying to tap into the mind of what 4th and 5th graders are actually reading and thinking that's relevant, that takes a little longer.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So my next question is, Darryl, is for our listeners out there that are listening, where can they find your books for download if they're interested in purchasing copies of it? And also, how do readers get in touch with you or find you or follow you?
Okay, so to purchase some of my children's books, you can go to my website, harveywritersgroup.com, and look for the tab that says Sunflower Series. That's what I call my children's books. I call them the Sunflower Series. There are currently 5 books in that grouping. My poetry will be added to the site by the summer, as it's not added yet. However, I do plan a summer tour, and I'll be going to different venues to sell my books. First week of June, I'll be in Sacramento, California, at their Sacramento Black Book Fair.
Mm-hmm.
The second weekend in June, I'll be at the Printers Row Book Fair in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And the third weekend in June, I'll be in Evanston at the Custer Street Fair on the corner of Washington and Custer.
Okay. All right. And then one other question that I meant to ask before is you also run a conference, a writers' conference. Can you tell us about that conference? Is it yearly, annually, semi-annual?
It is annual. So it's every St. Patrick's Day in March.
Mm-hmm.
I call that the Books and Brunch Gala. And what it is, it's a more kind of upscale event where we highlight different Black authors from across the country, and we celebrate what it means to be Black authors, what it means to tell our stories, what it means to actually go from the idea of writing something to actually writing it, to actually putting it in the public's hands. So we celebrate that every St. Patrick's Day, along with a couple dozen different Black authors, again, from Chicago, but also from around the country. And it's a special event as we have a brunch, we have a nice meal, and we let the audience learn more about these authors. That's the Books and Brunch Gala. But also, for the first time this year, I produced the Black Child Book Fair, which happened in February. And it was an amazing event where a couple of dozen different Black children's authors came together and on the west side of Chicago, which the west side, if you know, is sorely in need of resources. And it had not been done before. And it was so well received, and hundreds of people came out. So we will continue to support the West Side and bring that back next year.
Yeah. Okay, Darryl, thank you. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to share your passion for literacy, particularly children's literacy, here with us on A Reader's Paradise. And again, I want to thank you so much for all that you do for children and for children's literature.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be on your show, and I look forward to working with you in the future.
All right. Thanks, Darryl. Bye-bye.